Welcome to Meanwhile at the Museum, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes with the people, the places, the stories at Cincinnati Museum Center that you may not know or may never have seen. Today we're joined all the way from the mezzanine, Jill Beitz, Manager of Reference and Research for the Cincinnati History Library and Archives, which, for once, I wasn't the first one to admit it. You said whatever that means. What? In your words, in your day-to-day, what does that actually mean?
So I think that Manager of Reference and Research is just a fancy way of saying head librarian. I do all the things I would have done as a normal librarian, but I feel like I sound a lot more important.
So you've got the baddest shush in the land.
You betcha.
As head... A lot of people may not know that Cincinnati Museum Center, that Union Terminal, is home to the Cincinnati History Library and Archives, which... we can fact check my history on this. Dates back to 1835?
1831.
1831.
Actually.
Okay,
yes.
see.
So I do feel like we're one of the best kept secrets in the city. So trying to get the word out there part of why I'm on here. But yeah, the organization started collecting in 1831 and was the first real group in Ohio to start doing that. So we have items going back to the Northwest Territory and before because we were first. Somebody was... forward-thinking enough to collect items like that.
And a lot of people would think, oh, this stuff should be in Columbus, right? Because that's the state capital, which was not the first state capital, but also not the first major city in Ohio either. We're right here on the Ohio River, which at that time period, you needed some sort of consistent transportation. River provided that. So when it comes to that era, in collecting that history and looking to an established location for that, Cincinnati was it.
Right. We were the sixth largest city for a long time in the 19th century.
That's so cool.
And one of the largest settlements west of the Alleghenies. So,
what's the difference between the Allegheny and Appalachian Mountains?
Please don't ask me
are
that.
Someone let us know. I think
the Alleghenies are further north, right?
Are the Alleghenies part of the Appalachian Mountains? I don't know.
I think they go in there with those mountains up in New York, but I don't really know.
We just know we're west of the mountains, and,
right?
And that's what matters.
It's important to distinguish us from New York by saying west of the Alleghenies. So I don't know.
That's so we can still be the best at something, but not. Have to deal with the long history of the East Coast.
Correct.
On some of those things. So who uses the library? I mean, is it more of a collection space or is it an active library?
It is an active research library. We have tons of books, but you can't check them out. You have to use them on site. A lot of our collection is housed in a different building, but researchers contact us in advance and then we have the items waiting for them. Primarily, we get a lot of students, graduate students. We get a lot of writers, primarily nonfiction, but some fiction. And we get just some local history buffs. We've had the man who runs Spring in Our Steps for Cincinnati, which is about alleys and stairways in Cincinnati and preserving them. And he's in every week.
That's awesome.
We have a gentleman writing the history of Westwood. He's in every week. But then on Monday, we had a group of middle schoolers from Loveland come in. And we're starting to try to do more outreach to younger students because I feel like a lot of times history is what's missing in, school right now because there's so many other things that they need to learn. And so it was pretty fun. They came in and they have so many different interests. And just there was one young man who said, "Do you have anything with presidents?" So I, broke out the big guns and got the land grants that had been signed by Washington and Jefferson and Madison. And, just this boy, he was like 12 and his face just lit up and he was like, "Really? Is this fake?" And no, it's not.
That's what's so cool about it because history is what's missing for a lot of people. And I mean, I was a history major and I would always talk to people who are older than me and they say, "Oh, I really wish I would have paid more attention to history when I was in school." It seems to be something that often people come to later in life to have an appreciation for. But seeing primary documents, seeing George Washington's signature live and in person is a really special experience. I mean, people go all the way They go to Paris, they go to Louvre to see the Mona Lisa. Everyone knows what the Mona Lisa looks like. Everyone's seen a picture of it, but to see it in person is a completely different experience. And it's the same with these documents of these, larger than life figures from American history as well.
Exactly. We have some newspapers starting in the 1790s. And there was one day somebody was in there and just kind of said, what are some of the oldest things you have? So I pull out these bound newspapers, just flip them open. And there in 1804, it says, Burr has shot Hamilton. Hamilton not expected to survive. And of course, the news was 3 to 4 weeks late because it took a while for it to get here. And we all know how that ended. But, just especially when you can mash that with pop culture with a primary document there, it's kind of neat.
Yeah, because people recognize the name. And see, before the musical Hamilton, most of us learned about the Hamilton Burr duel from the Got Milk commercial.
The milk commercial,
yeah.
Yep.
And, which, fun fact that everyone's going to love, that commercial was directed by Michael Bay.
Really?
I think.
Transformers guy, right?
Yeah, Transformers guy, but he was originally a music video director. That's why Bad Boys and Transformers and everything else just look like extended music videos. But back to Hamilton and Burr and to Got Milk, which this podcast is not sponsored by Big Milk. It's just, that's an organic thing that came up. When students come in, what are they just kind of touring the library? Or are they learning about primary sources and how to use primary sources?
So it's a combination. So Clark Montessori comes in every other year and does neighborhood reports.
Oh, cool.
And so that is learning how to do research in a different environment and not using just the internet. And then, so this class on Monday, they had been at the History Museum and they just came down to talk about like what they found interesting at the History Museum and again, how to maybe find primary sources. They are going to do reports on things in their neighborhood, and they're from Loveland. And so we have like this great old map of when the railroad went through Loveland, and it's the center of town, and it was great. We pulled it out, and the kids were like, look, that's where Paxton's is. That's where so-and-so is. And that one kid was like, my house is on this street. And, it's a 150-year-old map. And so I think it sort of brings it to light, and then we could sort of explain to them the difference between primary and secondary and what an archive has to offer.
When I was in college, we had a book, like a workbook, essentially, of primary sources. And they were all just reprinted, but collected in there to work from. And primary sources are very cool because the language in it doesn't change, whether it's online, reprinted, or in person. And now everyone's doing research online. It's You can find scans of all these historic documents and all these things, but number one, that scan has to come from somewhere. Exactly. So someone has to have that document. And there's just this power of seeing things in person and seeing them for yourself. And I think as a person who loves history, seeing them in their kind of their native state, like what you want to look at the other aspects of what are the edges of it? Is there any printing that gets left out of a scan because it's not part of the map, but has some meaning? Everyone's seen National Treasure, so now everyone wants to know what's on the back of documents, which is, it is a thing. It's probably more interesting to people like you what's written on the back because a lot of times it's just collections notation. It's not any big secret, but seeing these things in person, it can be a transformative experience for people.
Right. And sometimes, because this organization has been collecting for almost 200 years, there are things that are in the collection that have been cataloged and no one's thought of for however long. So sort of two things. There's a book that came out earlier this year called The Madman's Will, and it was about the people that had been enslaved by Randolph in Virginia. Upon his death, he freed them. And then there was a lot going back and forth with the family. But when they left the plantation, they came through Ohio to go up north because someone in Ohio gave them land. When the author was here, he said, what do you have on this topic? So I looked up, I said, oh, that's interesting. In a different collection, there was a sketch of them. in someone's sketchbook. So he pulled the sketchbook out, and there's this beautiful drawing of these freed individuals going through Ohio, and he could actually recognize them from the descriptions he had read. He could recognize them in the drawing.
No kidding.
And so that's the cover of his book, actually.
That's very cool.
Yeah. And the other thing that's been happening over the past few years is there are some collections where something will say marriage contract in the finding aid, which is what you see in the catalog, which you see online. It just says marriage contract. When you get into the marriage contract, it is a woman who's marrying someone, and she's signing over ownership of all of her enslaved individuals. And it has a list of their names, their relationships, their ages. But if you just looked at the finding aid, you'd have no idea that all this information is there. And that's happened a few times where researchers come up and they're like, look at this. And so Christine, our archivist, is changing things in the finding aid as we go. But I think working in archives, it's a constant evolution of information, because maybe when it was cataloged in 1870, no one was too worried about it. And now it's important.
Well, it's a world of rabbit holes.
Exactly.
That you're looking for one thing and you see something else. And so every now and then you'll hear a researcher or a writer say, I set out to write this book, but when I got into it, it led me to the book that you're reading now. That can be completely different. And librarians are so important because you've seen these things and you know the tricks, you know what's in certain documents, you know stuff that you've stumbled on. Right. How do you go about your day-to-day? How do you go about your job and not just get sidetracked and say, oh my gosh, this thing is fascinating?
Oh, I am constantly sidetracked. That's my favorite part of my job. So I actually wanted to work here because I got so sidetracked. I used to work in the Clifton Library, which is in Boss Cox's old house. If you don't know who he is, he was the political boss of Cincinnati, late 19th, early 20th century. And I would come down here to do research on the house, which was a Hannaford house, and also Boss Cox, because supposedly he haunted the house and many things. I never saw any evidence of that. But I would come down here over and over, and every time, even though there wasn't much about Cox, but there's stuff about the house and a little bit about his wife. And I'd come down and say, are you hiring? Are you hiring? Are you hiring? Or never hiring. And then finally one day, there it was. And so, you just get down these rabbit holes. And I grabbed this. So this is Nicholas Longworth. There were three Nicholas Longworths. This is Nicholas Longworth III. Nicholas Longworth was one of the richest men in the country in the early 19th century.
The furniture Longworth or different?
No, he was an attorney and a land speculator, and he had a huge vineyard on Mount Adams called the Garden of Eden. So that's what Mount Adams was. And his wine was famous. Longworth wrote a poem about it. Big deal. But his grandson, Nicholas Longworth III, he married Alice Roosevelt and was the Speaker of the House in the early 20th century. But we have this beautiful little book that is from 1884 where he wrote a story and plays and illustrated it, and it has maps.
This is amazing.
And knights and horses, and it's just...
Do we know how old he was when he did this?
So it's dated in the catalog as 1884, and he was born in 1869, so 13, 14, I guess. But, I mean, the drawings are pretty good, and there's mermaids, dragons.
A color dragon, too. There's a lot of it's just black ink, but you got some color dragons. It looks like a normal composition book that people would get today. This black cover, little speckles on it. And then unlined pages that are just scrawled in black ink. But the binding on it...
He did his math in the back.
Was he good at math? Should we?
I don't know. I didn't check his math because
I'm
a librarian, so I don't have to do math.
The only decimals you're concerned about are Dewey Decimals.
Well played.
These are just things that you find.
Right.
What's the most interesting thing that you've found in our library collection?
Oh my gosh. So I think that everybody who works in a library archive has kind of their pet. And I tend to be pretty wonky and political. And so we have some letters between Teddy Roosevelt and his daughter Alice, who was married to Nicholas, and also between Nicholas. And they're not official presidential letters. They're kind of gossipy and funny, and I don't know, they make my heart happy.
The whole process of collections and preservation is so fascinating. How do you decide what you take, what you keep, what's worthwhile, what's not? And you said these are gossipy letters. So for a lot of people, you may say, well, this didn't impact local history. This didn't impact history. This didn't leave a mark. But it gives you insight into a person who then did go make those decisions.
Right. And I mean, and Alice lived here. So there's some crossover there. There's some discussion of Kentucky politics and some Cincinnati politics. And so, plus he was a president, so they're relevant. I know the collection is so huge that now it is the archivists and the people in collections really take a long time to decide what belongs here and what doesn't. Because, we'd love to take in everything, but there's another collection. It's the Blinn family collection, and they're a family that kept their letters from the 1700s to like the 1950s.
Wow.
And they're a normal family, but when you read the letters, there's discussion. I mean, they're local, but there's discussion of abolition. There's discussion of women's suffrage. There's discussion of the Civil War. I mean, it's just fascinating because it's just the day-to-day existence of people throughout all these periods of time. I think it's a really important collection. It's a huge collection. But yeah, I think that some of it's, you can look at the presidents and go, wow, look, but some of it's just, you can look at this. Here's this normal person that, and now just their day-to-day things they were talking about is important. And I think it shows that, all of us have a viewpoint that can be important, or for people in the future to look back and see. Not that anybody writes letters anymore, but
I want to come back to that, but those personal aspects that's the flavor on it. That's the spice. That's what, when you take a history class in school at any level, you're talking about big movements, big impact. But, the Great Depression, the Civil War, all these monumentous events in history impacted individuals. Mm-hmm. It's very easy to see, from 1861 to 1865, the Civil War is all anyone ever talked about. It was front of mind all the time. But people were also going about their lives and falling in love, having arguments, trying to settle debts, doing all this stuff in the background of this. Mm-hmm. And that is an important thing to remember. So it's not just the speeches and the letters that Lincoln writes and other politicians write. It's how everyday citizens are interpreting that and viewing that paints that full picture.
Right. It shows you what life was actually like, even if you weren't a soldier on the battlefield. Right. Especially if you weren't a soldier on the battlefield.
As you said, people aren't writing letters anymore. So how do you think that changes going forward? Is there going to be a collection of SIM cards in the future where someone's like, I want all of Barack Obama's text messages he sent, like 100 years from now, are we going to want people's text messages? Because I can tell you, if they get my text messages, it's going to be a lot between my wife and I saying, what do you want for dinner tonight? I don't know. I picked last night. It's your turn.
Yeah, those are mine too. They're very exciting for everyone. I don't know what we're looking at. I know a while back, the Library of Congress, I think, had decided they were going to keep all the tweets. But I'm not sure they're still doing that. It's because where are you going to do that? You're not going to have the space. And you're going to print out people's emails. I have no idea how it's going to work. The other thing we're running up against, which I'm not sure how it's going to affect the future, is generally people, let's say high school and younger, can't read cursive anymore. They're not trained to read cursive. And I hadn't realized, I'd heard it, but I hadn't realized it until we had a group and they were like, I can't read this. And they were freshmen in college. And I was like, So I'm not sure how to handle that.
My daughter's in third grade now, and she thinks cursive is essentially just putting like a little loop-de-loop on different letters. And I remember Christine Ingalls saying once a handful of years ago that reading old handwriting is like a superpower, because it is, you look at it, anyone's notes, and today, and people have such sloppy or really neat handwriting. I remember seeing, we have a letter, I think, from John Quincy Adams, and it is the neatest, like most precise writing ever. But a lot of it can be very sloppy,
Right.
especially if it's personal notes, if it's a journal or if it's a diary or a note to a close friend or something versus an official document or letter that you're going to have sealed or stamped or something like that. So how do you figure out what you're reading sometimes when you're looking at some of this handwriting?
It's definitely a learning curve. I've gotten so much better at it than I used to be. But there's some. So there are items in our collection written in German script, which I don't know if you've ever seen that.
No.
It's English, but there are some different letters. It's really hard to explain, and I can't read it. We have like a key, and I still can't do it. I think Mickey will just call up Don Tolsman and say, I'm going to send you a picture of this, please translate it. But I had somebody who wanted me to help him decipher this letter someone had written. And it's the same thing, almost like you figure out what this certain letter looks like and try to place it in context. This particular letter was about some weapon the guy had invented during the Civil War. And I said, okay, I can get these words, but I have no idea of the context of these. So together we figured out what he was saying because he knew the weaponry and I knew the rest of it. But the aforementioned Nicholas Longworth has some of the worst handwriting I've ever seen. And I have the handwriting of a third grader, so I totally understand that. But he would write letters to Hiram Powers. There's a whole collection of he and Hiram Powers, who was a sculptor living in Italy. And there's a letter where Hiram Powers writes to him, my wife and I enjoy your letters because it gives us extra time to spend together. Like, we can't read your handwriting, so we spend extra time trying to decipher it. It's some shade, you know.
These are the humanizing moments that only come out through that. And there's a lot of moments, a lot of famous phrases or speeches or moments that are retold by someone else. I remember talking to him in this moment, and this is what he said, and this is how he acted. And so you're getting people being paraphrased a lot. But seeing letters like that from Hiram Powers, you have this humanizing moment right there, right in front of you, verbatim. If you're writing a story about Nicholas Longworth, that it fleshes him out as a person, as a character in that story.
It does. Instead of just being like this incredibly wealthy man who owns everything in Cincinnati, it's like, well, he has bad handwriting. You know, and
who's had the best handwriting that you've seen?
Oh my gosh, I don't know. There's actually a lot of good handwriting out there because I think people took it very seriously.
What else did you do? You didn't, you know.
Yeah, true. You aren't watching TV.
Right.
If you were a woman, you were doing even, you know, especially if you were a woman of some means, you really didn't have anything else to do. So
just practice your penmanship.
Yes. Your piano playing.
This is a good question. I'd be curious. Who on staff has the best handwriting that you've seen, and who has the worst?
One of the librarians. Mickey has really good handwriting.
I could see that from Mickey.
I probably have the worst handwriting. I don't see a ton of it. I mean, I'll see like different collections things, but I don't know. The worst hasn't me, but Mickey has beautiful handwriting, often in purple ink. But
she is someone who seems very. Every project that someone comes in and they're working on becomes her project. Like, she is invested in it, and she's as excited about it as they are.
Absolutely.
And that's just the energy she brings to every single project.
Absolutely.
So when did you join the Museum Center?
It was 4 years in March.
Okay. So
just in time for
really?
COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, what a time to be alive.
Yeah.
You walk around the museum and everyone has their different moments, like their different crucibles here. I think COVID-19 was that for a lot of people in every industry. And then you're going back, you had the restoration of Union Terminal, which can be broken up into different chunks, and then it just it goes on. And it's fun to see how people, it's like generations. People like, oh, I'm of this generation of the museum center. I'm of this generation. So it's always interesting to hear when people start and to see like what that defining moment is for them that they've survived. And you survived a big one.
It was probably COVID because we had the opening of the reopening of the library in July, and then March, it all kind of went to hell.
Has COVID changed how people access the library or choose to access the library?
It really has. So two things. One, which started pretty much immediately, is we end up doing a lot more of the research for the researchers because they're remote. And secondly, we lost a fair amount of staff, so we're by appointment now because we don't have couriers to go back and forth. A lot of researchers are traveling again, so that's starting to kind of level out. I think we've had more visitors this year than in the last few years. It's been a busy year, actually.
It's really fun for me to see the different stories that our collections are used in. And there will be a newspaper story in LA or one in Minneapolis, Austin, Texas, like all over the country, all over the world. And I'm like, why am I getting flagged for Cincinnati Museum Center for an article on this? And they used one of our images. They've used us for research for the story, and we're cited in it in that way. So the breadth of researchers who use a library is really incredible, and where that shows up, a lot of our collections are regionally based, but have national and global impact.
Yes, and some of that goes back to when we were this huge city with a lot of immigrants coming into it. But we've had some real researcher from Italy and from France in just this year, and they seem to be focused on Cincinnati as a border city during the Civil War, which is interesting because they're from France and Italy. Okay, so we get a lot of that. One of my first emails I got when I started working here at the library email account was someone from the Netherlands who had read a story about a sea monster in the Ohio River in the 1950s and wanted to know what we had about it. And I was like, what? And in fact, there had been a storm, and they finally determined it was just big trees floating down the river, but there were news stories about it. I was able to find newspaper articles about the sea monster in the Ohio River.
What's funny about that is they will write the news stories, and then they'll debunk it. They'll say, oh, well, this is really what it is. But then there's additional stories about how excited everyone was that it could be it, or what if it was, and all this other stuff. Yeah. How does this person even find that out?
Exactly. I've lived here most of my life, and I'd never heard about the sea monsters in the Ohio River, and here he is over in the Netherlands. And
did they name it? Did they get as far as naming it?
No, it got debunked fairly quickly, but people were calling the police about it. I mean, just odd.
Wow.
It was a slow news day.
I mean, Nessie and Bigfoot. What is the one in Lake Champlain just called Champ?
I don't know about that one.
It's the North American version of
Nessie.
Of Nessie, yeah, the Loch Ness Monster. They carry so much power.
Yeah.
I mean, people love that. Just get caught up in the lore of it. When you got that request, did you get the answer and keep reading, or did you get the answer and move on?
There wasn't a lot out there. Like I said, there were some news stories. So I got the answer, sent the articles to the guy and moved on. But it's been 4 years and it's still in my head.
Is that the strangest request?
Thousands of emails later, it's still in my head.
You need to print that and frame it somewhere. Is that the strangest request you've gotten, or what are some just odd requests that you've gotten? And have we been able to fulfill them?
That's probably the oddest. Sometimes we get, you'll get these nebulous requests that you don't know how to answer about, like various haunted places in the city and things like that. It's like, well, here's what you hear, but I can't speak to whether or not they're actually haunted. And then sometimes you'll get, we've gotten them about circus performers, like specific circus performers, because the Robinson Circus was here. And sometimes they're very specific circus performers. There was one who was a woman who was an equestrian performer. So she stood on horses and rode around the ring. And then she died by falling out a window when she was pretty young. And you get these things where you're a little suspicious when things like that happen because she probably had good balance.
Yeah.
So just things that make you think, I don't know.
Have you had a request where you walk away and continue to research it, that your interest is piqued, that you want to learn more?
That happens all the time. You were talking about how do you not go down rabbit holes? Yeah,
right.
I'm always down a rabbit hole. So there's someone had contacted us a few years ago about the twin sisters, which were cannons that Cincinnati sent to Texas in the 1830s. The U.S. was not supposed to be sending weapons to Texas, but one of the Burnett's was down there. So Cincinnati was collecting money to get Texas away from Mexico. And I ended up so far down the rabbit hole, I found we have a collection with all sorts of stuff about Cincinnati during that era and Texas and the twin sisters, but no one knows where these cannons got to. And everybody's trying to solve the mystery of where the cannons went. It's the same thing, and this one has gotten Mickey. It hasn't gotten me. There's supposedly a train under a hillside on the west side where the tunnel collapsed in on the train, west side of Cincinnati.
Really?
People come in all the time looking for maps and things, and it feels like people would really know if it happened, but it's kind of this urban myth out there going on.
Do they walk in with miners' helmets and pickaxes and say, "Do you have any maps of railroad lines from the 1850s?"
And we do have maps, and I will say that the railroad people are very serious, and they know things. I mean, I'll have conversations. Say, "Well, did you know?" I have no idea. So,
railroad fans is a real brotherhood. It is. Railroad fandom has to be similar to Star Wars fandom or something like that, because it's like you never grow out of it. You start young, and if one of your parents or grandparents was into it, there's a good chance that you're going to be into it also.
So yeah, I live in Glendale, and so the train goes right kind of on the edge of the square where the restaurants are and stuff. You go up there and walk up there, and there's always people sitting on the benches filming the trains, watching the trains. And it's the same people over and over, so it feels like it would get boring, but I guess it doesn't.
When I was a kid, we used to put pennies on the railroad tracks, which I think might be illegal.
I don't know, but I have a friend who does that with her niece, so I'll pretend I didn't hear it was illegal.
I was probably
I don't think you're supposed to get on the tracks and get them back.
I was probably 9 or 10, so let's hope it's outside the statute of limitations. But it was, you have this mild moment of fear that's like, what does it take to derail a train? Certainly not a penny.
Yeah, I hope not.
And then your friend's like, I put a quarter down this time. I'm like, no, a quarter's too thick. Are you a madman? Yeah. About how many books, papers do we have in the library collections? Do you know?
We have 4,000 manuscript collections, I believe.
That's always
small collections and 350 large collections. Books, I've heard a number, but I can't think that that's right.
But a manuscript collection is not just one book. It could be multiple.
A manuscript is a one-of-a-kind thing. So it's going to be like family papers, business papers, letters, something like that. They're not books generally, unless there's like a bound volume or a diary or something. And those are really the cream of the crop of the collection because they're things that nobody else has.
You talked about family papers. Do these mostly come in the collection from a member of the family? Because if you get family papers, you're kind of peering into people's personal lives. So what's the dynamic of, why are we allowed to do that? Why?
If someone in the family, is the keeper of them and gives them to us. Sometimes it's people that just promise them, that we'll give them to us while they're still alive, or upon their death, we'll turn them over. And again, a lot of times it's people who had important positions or something like that. I have a lot of political papers of the mayors of Cincinnati, Marion Spencer, those, Ted Berry, politicians. So those will be mostly professional papers. Then we had a family who had donated their father's items. It was a small collection, but he was a Tuskegee Airman.
Oh, wow.
And he also was very involved in Lincoln Heights politics. And so that's a fairly new collection. And one of the sisters was in from out of town over the weekend. And so they came in just to kind of look at them and bring some more things. So we're constantly collecting. And I know that Christine and Sarah and Arabeth, the collections people, are really trying to build parts of the collections that have been sort of left behind or neglected. So, African Americans and immigrant communities and neighborhoods which may have been sort of neglected in the collections process. And so we're starting to get some traction out there, and it's great. Women's history. We do have some, but a lot of times it's a little frustrating when you're in a collection and you can only find the person, it's Mrs. John Smith or whatever, and you have to hunt for her actual name. So
a lot of time it's histories of learning about old white men, and if that's what is making up a majority of collections, that's the only voice that comes through. And unless you're intentional about expanding collections, which goes into what's available, what's out there, and looking at institutions historically and what they were focused on, unless you're trying to be intentional about that and sometimes being creative about it, that it may not take the same form until those primary sources are collected or uncovered or really dove into. Those voices from the past can't come out.
Exactly. And some of that is, like I was saying before, is just finding things already in the collection that we didn't realize were there because of how they were cataloged. The other thing is, so we have a new fellowship called the Emerging Scholars Fellowship that's been funded by a gentleman and a researcher, a non-traditional researcher. So maybe someone who is a professor but not on tenure track, something like that. So our first one started yesterday, and she is actually doing her project on the United States colored troops from Cincinnati. And so what we're hoping, and we've started to pull at a few places that we think we can get more information, is that part of the reason this fellowship is funded to find the things in our collection that are not getting attention or that we maybe don't know are there. And so she has a year, and she's doing a podcast series on it. So I'm so excited.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So
I'm very much looking forward to that. When items come into the collection, what's the process? What system does that go into? So someone just drops off a box and says, "Here are all these papers."
Yeah, they're supposed to contact us first. But yes. So that all runs through Christine and Sarah. They are the people that take in the collections and organize the collections. I'm just the people that helps the public with the collections. So, but the process is that they bring them in, a decision is made how they will be organized. A lot of times they come in and they're already organized, so it's just make a finding aid and sort of deal with it. There is a really huge backlog of manuscript collections that the archivists have really been making a lot of headway on lately. So
I have a comic book I wrote when I was 12. Would you all be interested in that?
I can put it right there with Nicholas Longworth, yeah.
His drawings are a lot better.
Think about it in 100 years, though. People are like, oh, Cody Hefner. He was the vice president of the Museum Center. Look at this cool comic book he made.
Oh, man, that would be disastrous for a lot of people. Are librarians connected to other librarians? Like, what's the fraternity like? Because I do have to say, I got a letter from the president of the All-Glaze County Public Library revoking my library card a handful of years ago because my brother checked out a book called Cry of the Kalahari and lost it. And so it never went back. And I just kept getting letter after letter after letter saying, these are the fines, where's the book? And then finally, a very apologetic letter saying, we're sorry, we have to revoke your membership. And I don't know what stigma that carries. Like, am I flagged in
All the libraries know about you.
Oh my God.
But if your brother checked it out, why were you being flagged? Did he use your card?
So he was in college at the time and apparently couldn't find it on campus and said, check the library. And I found it. And I was a younger brother. I was so happy to help him. And I said, I got it. And I gave it to him and then just got lost.
Yeah.
Under
Everybody knows about you. There's an
boxes.
ALAAPB. Yeah.
This is. I always wonder why the doors are locked when I try to go down to the library.
That's right. Yeah,
it's just me.
It is funny though, because it always makes me laugh. Like, I'll meet somebody and they'll be like, "What do you do?" I say, "I'm a librarian." "Oh, do you know?" And it's just some random librarian from somewhere. One time someone did ask me that, and I was like, "Oh, I do know that person." But librarians do talk, but generally just locally.
Yeah.
So you're probably okay. I don't know anybody from Auglaize County, but
Okay.
Now I know, so I'm going to spread the word.
Great. I can never go back there.
Especially if you work for a public library, like county-wide, you're going to know who the problems are.
And so you came from Hamilton County Public Library system.
Yeah, I was at public library until this.
How long were you there? What's
20 years.
What's Jill's backstory? 20 years. Wow.
Yeah, so I was public librarian for 20 years in Butler County and then in Hamilton County. But in all fairness, I had a library in my garage when I was like 6 where I would make the neighborhood kids sign out books on cards.
That's awesome.
So I guess it was destiny. I don't know. But yeah, I was a public librarian.
That used to be the cool thing with the cards and the books to figure.
Stamp.
It was always cool to look and be like, oh, this book's not been checked out for 12 years or 20 years or something like that. That's gone now. Just like in school, you used to get textbooks and you'd have to write your name on it.
You had the book before.
And it would be like, oh, I have this person's book. That's so exciting.
Yeah. If you go to the Mercantile, I think you can still see when the last time the book was checked out.
Really?
Yeah, I think they still have the old school things in there.
So this has been your path since you were 6.
Yeah. And it was just a whole career change. I mean, the public to private, and it's a hard jump to make. Like, once you're niched into there, it's really hard. And I will always be so thankful to Scott Gamfer for giving me a chance with this. Because I think I was like, I can totally do this job. And my cover letter, I think, was like, please hire me, please. I'm a super history nerd, and I just want to come there and talk about Cincinnati history. And so, yeah.
See, Scott Gamfer was, he used to be the director of the library. Was that his title?
I thought he was more than that. Ruby Rogers, and I think Scott was for a while, and then he was also
director of history collections as well.
Yeah.
So anyone who knows Scott is pulling their hair out right now because we just did him a disservice. But Scott was always great because he'd say, Scott, media has this question, they want to know about this. Can you help? He'd say, I'm not a historian. And then he would rattle off 5 or 6 anecdotes about that exact topic. And I said, Scott, that's what they want to hear. They want to hear like the juicy, interesting stuff. They can look like online and, this is who they were. This is when they were born, and the very simple stuff. They want to know those humanizing details, those interesting facts. And he could just rattle those off, which is what you've been doing. You've like, that's what you glean when you're dealing with this material.
Right. And my undergrad is in English Lit, for heaven's sake. So I'm certainly not a historian, but you learn things. And
was there a book when you were a kid that you checked out from the library over and over?
Mrs. Basil E. Frank, like, what is it? The Hidden Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweller. It's about 2 little kids that run away to a museum. So, see, it all comes together.
I've heard of that.
I've
seen that book.
It's a great book. You should read it. Sometimes I still read it.
That's amazing. And you just checked it out over and over?
Yeah.
That's great.
So it was all meant to be.
Was there a love of reading or a focus on reading as you were growing up?
Yeah. So my mom taught English, and so I think but I always just liked to read and would read everything in front of me.
So if someone is interested in researching something, if they're working on a project, or they might just be curious to dive into one of your rabbit holes, how do they go about it?
So the easiest way is probably to shoot us an email at library@cincymuseum.org, or you can also call us at 513-287-7030. We are also in the library 12 to 4 Thursdays and Fridays, open door. Anybody can come in. We're trying to expand those hours a little bit. But if you want to make an appointment, we're also there on other days. It's just sometimes we bounce between buildings.
Do people, they're interacting with real historic documents. Right. Do you have to wear gloves? Or what are the safety precautions for the materials?
So right now, you do not have to wear gloves if you're using the manuscripts. There's kind of been a turn toward the gloves are more likely to tear something. However, if you're using photos, you'll need to wear gloves. And just in the library, you can only have pencils, papers, and electronics. No bags, no drinks, no food, that sort of thing. But we're pretty easygoing.
It's a really fun experience. I've been in the library, and I've been in there as groups are researching something or dealing with the document. It's really fun to watch that discovery process for people, because everyone's looking for something. Hey, I'm researching this. What do you have on it? Because in their mind, they have a question that they're trying to answer. And a lot of times, they have what they hope the answer is going to be. And as they're exploring it, that changes completely. And it's such a fun process to watch. And going back to the grand scheme and the big picture of Cincinnati Museum Center, it is built on those almost 200 years of the History Library and Archives and the historical collection that came from it. But it's still, like, it feels like this blast from the past, but it is still applicable. It is still such an active part of what we do.
It really is. And sometimes it feels like I think I can take almost anything in this country now and connect it back to something in Cincinnati. I'll be doing something and I'll be like, oh, wait, but that person lived in Cincinnati or this happened or something like that. One of a researcher who's, my favorite, but who's in fairly often, is on the board of the observatory. And so he's been in, we have a lot of crossover with the observatory. And so we partner with other Cincinnati organizations, but also one of the reporters from the Inquirer, who's been working on like all the changes that are coming to downtown. She comes in and she's like, okay, what do you have about this neighborhood at this time and things? And so everything that was old is new or vice versa. And Cincinnati's such I don't know. I mean, when you look at the West End, I think we all know it was wiped out. And then, now they're trying to bring it back. And so in order to bring it back, people are looking at what was it like before. And it's just, I don't know. I love my job.
It's so fun to be that place, to be that go-to for people who have that question. The question I ask everyone is, if you could change roles with someone for a day, who would it be in the organization? Or what would the role be?
Bob Genheimer. Because I want to play in the archaeology collections.
Do you want to play in the archaeology collections, or do you want to get out and dig in the dirt?
That too. Yeah, all of the above.
What is it about the archaeology collections that interests you?
I don't know. There's so much there to learn, and especially you'll go in the room where the collections are. It's like, I don't know. There's something there. I want to learn about that and that and that and that. And I mean, it's that way in my current job, but just more so because his collection is so much broader. And I don't know. Plus the digging in the dirt sounds fun.
Bob would be a good one. Yeah, it's, for me at least, it's hard to walk into any collection space and not just be amazed or just curious. And you just want to poke around. And it's a lot of times you don't know what you're looking at. You're like, I wonder what that is. But then you see something and you say, oh, I know this little kernel about this thing in front of me. And you feel like you just feel this wave wash over you, that it's like something that you've only read about or you've only heard about or have this small inkling about. And there it is right in front of you. Mm-hmm. And we have 3 million opportunities for that to happen for people in the collections.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Jill, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for talking with us. Hopefully people are tuned into the fact that we have a history library in the building. You're not checking out books. You're checking out moments of history, tangible moments of history at your fingertips.
Yeah.
Where else do you get this opportunity?
It's pretty cool. People should come and see us.
It's not bad. Thank you, Jill.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Meanwhile at the Museum. Remember, if you like what you heard, please rate and subscribe. But more importantly, come see for yourself. Visit cincymuseum.org to see the latest reasons to visit. And if you have any questions, comments, or just want to tell us how much you love the show, send us an email at meanwhile@cincymuseum.org. Thanks for listening.